It's with no small amount of pleasure that I'm able to reintroduce Celi Reader and Patrick Smith back to the podcast. Now, these are two guests that you'll know and love, and judging by the listenership figures, I do know that you'd love them both to quite a great extent. Celi, Patrick, it's great to have you both back. How are you feeling?
Pretty good. Yeah, I'm happy to be back.
Yeah,
Yeah, me
yeah.
too.
So
It's been a while. It's been great. Yeah, excited.
amazing, amazing. Now, I've brought you back. I brought both of you back because, as actually surprisingly few emails would attest, you're both in Japan. I am useless with time zones, but we've managed to figure it out. We're all here. For the few people who actually missed out on your episodes and for that heinous crime, you can go back and listen to them after this. For those who don't already know, can you tell us a little about yourselves? And Patrick, I'm going to give the floor to Celi first because you were the most recent. So let's be fair. Let's be fair.
Sounds good.
Celi, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? And then Patrick, will go to you next.
Yeah, so my name's Celi. I am from Puerto Rico. I was born and raised there, moved to the States in high school, and then decided I wanted to get a degree in education. Got my degree in elementary ed and left Texas straight to Korea. I've been teaching abroad for the last 3 years between South Korea, Thailand, and now I am living in Iwaki City in Fukushima Prefecture in Japan. 27 years old, and yeah, just happy to be.
Fantastic. And Patrick, for the people that didn't listen to your episode, maybe don't know who you are, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So my name is Patrick Smith. I am a teacher currently I teach in Tokyo, live just outside of Tokyo. But I moved to Japan probably about 10 years and a month ago, I think. I think it's been 10 years and a month now, to the city of Sendai, which is up north, where I was an English teacher for 5.5 years. Then I moved down to the Tokyo area where I taught English for a few more years, about 3 more years. And I currently work in an international school as a homeroom teacher. I teach first grade. I grew up in Flint, Michigan, and I taught in China actually before moving to Japan. I taught for 3 years in Beijing, then I moved to Japan. It's been a long while that I've been living abroad.
Amazing, amazing. And right from the jump there, I'm going to start using more Americanisms because you both grew up there. But right from the jump, you can tell there's a really varied and kind of, there's an exciting opportunity to talk about the different places within Japan that you've been, because I think, people get preconceptions about, I don't think people realize how massive Japan is, and that's something that we'll explore a little bit later on. And that's something for people who are listening to the podcast. Celi and Patrick are both nodding at me enthusiastically, so that's always a good sign. So we'll touch on this briefly. What, or indeed who, inspired you to teach in Japan? And I know that sounds like it's both a small and big question, but I guess I don't know another way to ask it. Patrick, we'll go to you first. What was the major driver?
For me, I would say I was interested in Japan for a number of years before even moving to China. But through just a number of circumstances, I ended up moving to Beijing first and teaching there, while Japan was still sort of in the back of my head for a while. But my older sister, she actually taught in Japan just a few years before I did. So seeing her there and then being able to visit her while I was in China, we taught at the same time. While I was in China, she was in Japan. Being able to visit her here and see what the country was like and what her school was like, what the kids were like, that was a big sort of re-motivator for me, I guess, to make the transition to Japan from China. So it was a number of factors, but I would say the biggest thing in the end was being able to visit my sister here, seeing her do it first.
Amazing. And so, Celi, when we last spoke, when we recorded your podcast, you were in the process of applying to a particular program to teach in Japan. We'll speak more about that in a little while, but you were in the process of kind of making that move. What was it that inspired you, or did any one thing kind of inspire you to move to Japan? You'd already had that experience, like Patrick, to an extent of teaching in different countries in Asia. What was it about Japan that kind of pulled you in that direction?
Right. So I think when I first started looking for jobs abroad, I just knew that I wanted to leave Texas.
Okay.
And I just started looking. I remember just doing searches, and Japan was always coming up. So was Korea. I really wanted to go to Thailand. However, this was right during the pandemic. So Thailand was not an option anymore. I ended up going to South Korea. I considered Japan before it got crazy and everything because my husband actually was the one that mentioned it. He's always wanted to come to Japan and was really interested in Japanese culture. For me, it wasn't a Japan is like has to be the first place I wanted to go, but I knew that I had to put it on my list. So I told myself I wanted to go to 3 countries and teach there before I kind of checked where I wanted to settle down. So that's why I think my husband kind of sparked that interest in me, and we knew we wanted to do it eventually, just not right as the first country that we were going to head to.
Cool. So, Sally, just a follow-up question there. I sort of made reference to the application process before. The JET program, we talked about it a little in the last episode, and you were in the process of applying for that. Just as a follow-up, can you tell me a bit about that process? Because that's something that a lot of our listeners are gonna go through, or they're gonna think about applying for. What was that like for you?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is the JET program application, I think is a really big commitment just because the deadline and the timeline of it is so long. Like I said, I had Japan in the back of my mind for a really long time, and that kind of played into my plans in other countries and contracts and length of time that I was going to stay there because the application does start around like fall. I think it opens October or November, and then you don't arrive in Japan until that next year, August. So it's about a 10-month long process that you're having to be committed, kind of like locked in. Like I know I'm going to Japan, and kind of work your way around that. So I would say just to keep that in mind if JET program specifically is the program that you're going to apply to.
Okay, cool. Patrick, your sister had already been teaching in Japan. You'd visited Japan, but I want to know before you'd even set foot in Japan. And Celi, I'll ask this of you as well. What did you what did you envision Japan being like? If that's not too broad a question, what kind of dreams did you have of living in Japan? And we'll talk about kind of how your dreams and expectations met eventually. But what did you imagine it would be like? If that's not too broad.
Hmm. I think so. I remember the very first time I visited my sister in Japan. I remember being on the plane, flying over. I remember landing and um, seeing what everything was like, and I was just in such awe. I was like, this is the place, that I've been dreaming of for so long. I think before coming, I knew Japan was a super clean place based on what I knew from my sister. I knew it was clean. I knew it was the people were kind, but that was pretty much all I knew. I knew it was a land of, anime, video games, all that. But coming for the first time and seeing what it was like was it just went way beyond my expectation. I was like, this is the best place on earth. I had that sort of like that fantasy. That fantasy stuck with me, I would say, during that initial visit. It didn't leave. It didn't start to change until I moved here. And like you said, we'll talk about how
Right.
things shifted, I guess, a little bit later. But yeah, I thought it was amazing beforehand. And even during that first trip, which was just like maybe 5 days, it stayed that way. I was like, I can't wait to move here.
Mhm. And Sally, just to kind of jump in on that, as a seasoned traveler, especially in East Asia, what did you imagine Japan would be like, and how did landing kind of meet your expectations or your hopes?
Yeah, I think so. For me, I hadn't been to Japan before I moved here. I had taught in South Korea, so I think I knew everything that we see on social media about Japan, which I know it's so much, especially right now. So I had this idea that it was clean, the public transportation, but I think I was also comparing it to Korea in a sense because the
Sure.
public transport is similar. They really do have a lot of similarities structure wise. So for me, I didn't really know what to expect as of Japan specifically. I do remember landing in the airport and there was like Mario stuff all over and Pokemon figures everywhere. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm obviously in Japan. I think that's one thing that Japan does. It's like, we are video games, we are Nintendo, and we're going to rock with it. And that's something that you really do. Like Patrick said, you experience it the moment that you land. And I think it's a really nice and really pretty experience to have when you know you're going to move here before you go through all the processes, right, and all the official business stuff. I think it's really fun to just enjoy it as the first few days of just absorbing everything Japanese.
100% agree.
And just to kind of extend on that a little bit, we mentioned it a little bit before, but let's talk about where you were in Japan. We'll talk a little bit more later on about how massive Japan is, because again, I can't emphasize that enough. Especially as someone who lives in Scotland, which is tiny, but like it really is. It's a village. Everyone knows each other. But where was it where you first kind of landed in Japan, and what were those initial experiences like of the towns or cities where you first were? We talk about expectations as well. How far where you were first based? How far how close were those places to the kind of visions that you had in your head about what it would be like? Go to Patrick first on that.
Again, Tokyo was pretty much just like, okay, this is what I thought Japan was. When I moved here and began to like live in Japan, I was up north in Sendai, where I was for the first 5.5 years. It was similarly kind of similarly close to what my expectations were, except for the fact that Sendai is a much smaller city than Tokyo. So, there's less people, there's less big buildings all around and everything. But also the people are more, I think they're a bit more shy up north. And that was probably one of the first things that hit me about how wrong some of my expectations were. It's very difficult in Japan to befriend people because, well, I wouldn't say it's hard to befriend people, but it's hard to make friendships that last in Japan because Japanese people are very reserved. They're very, they keep to themselves, they open up to people they know really well. But if you're a random stranger that they meet, they're not really gonna be as open with you. And that's kind of the case with most people just in the world in general. But then, you add each other online or, exchange Instagrams or something, but you're not really likely to hear from them for months and months and months, years, unless you're really, really intentional about it. And you should not expect them to be intentional because they're not going to be, because that's just how they are. That was something that was hard for me when I moved here because I was coming from China where people are so outgoing there, and I made so many friends within my first year there. People would approach me and ask if I could practice English with them, and that was how I got to know a lot of people. And so none of that happened here in Japan. No one would approach you to talk to you. No one will come up to you on a train and ask if, where you're from, if you can speak English or not, like they would in that was a huge surprise for me and something that took me a while to get used to. Living up north in Sendai, I like Sendai a lot. I miss it a lot, actually. And it was great. It wasn't the same as Tokyo. It wasn't quite the same as all of the expectations, the buildup that I had prior to moving here, but it was still a great experience.
Sure. And Celi, talk to me about where you're teaching now, and similar to Patrick, about kind of the reception that you got, the kind of community that you were in terms of as a language teaching assistant, and the kind of experiences that you had on a similar kind of level. Did you have similar kind of experiences, or did it help to be within a kind of community of teachers and have a network kind of that way? What were your experiences?
Yeah, so applying to the JET program, I had requested pretty rural placements. Actually, Miyagi Prefecture, whereas Sendai was one of my preferences. JET program is notorious for not placing you in your preferences. It's kind of just giving them an idea of landscape and area. So I do live in a really big city, but what makes it a big city is that they took a ton of villages and then put them all together. So it is one of the biggest cities in Japan area-wise, but it still is countryside. The only part that doesn't look like the countryside is our very small downtown area. So coming into Japan, I knew that I had requested, not Tokyo, because one of the things I wanted was to learn Japanese. And I expected really good transportation because that's what you know Japan for, right? But then I arrived, and I think that was one of the biggest shocks outside of obviously Patrick already mentioned with people. It can definitely be really difficult to connect to people, but transportation, that's where you rely on to go meet people and to go out into the city. And then I arrived, and my last bus from the downtown area was at 6 p.m. And 2 months, I think it was 3 or 4 months in, they cut my weekend buses. So now I can't get into the downtown area and do things from where I live. That's a little bit, even 10 minutes away from the downtown area by car, but it's so countryside and just elderly people. No buses. I think that was my main thing, was how difficult it was to get around when all I wanted to do was explore this new city that I was living in. And yeah, just seeing the vast difference between being in a big city in Japan and having that comfort of the transportation to being here. It's been pretty crazy. And also there's like no English, which is a great challenge, right, to learn Japanese. But people, I think, with the shyness, and then also the level of low English that we have in this prefecture, in the city specifically, makes it a tiny bit harder to just kind of like find your place. I did just start leasing a car though. It's like Iwaki City unlocked. It's been amazing. I recommend, if you are in a rural placement, to lease a car. It is really, really affordable. It's great.
Can I piggyback off of what Celi was saying?
Of course, yeah.
I have a lot of respect for teachers who, when they first move to Japan, or not just teachers, just anyone moving to Japan, when they go to the countryside areas, to hear that, Celi, you chose specifically not Tokyo because you wanted a more kind of authentic Japan experience that would enable you to learn the language. That's great. And that's something I would actually recommend for people who are coming to Japan. Sendai is kind of inaka, like countryside, but it's also got a pretty big like downtown area. And the place that I was located in within Sendai was not really countryside. So it didn't feel like countryside to me. It was fine, but I do wish that I had a more like authentically countryside experience, because not only do you get the opportunities to learn the language better because you are forced to speak it with locals, but also I think I mentioned before that Japanese people tend to be more closed off, but I do feel like in countryside areas, they're way more open to chatting with you as a foreigner, because oftentimes you are the only foreigner in that area, or one of the only ones. And so they remember you. They will talk to you when they see you out and about. And it just makes the experience a whole lot different than it is if you move into a bigger city like Tokyo or Osaka from the beginning. And so I have a lot of respect for people who choose that, and I think that's a great decision. So kudos to you, Celi.
So much. It was difficult at first, but it's night and day different once you get used to it. It's been really nice.
Awesome.
I'm going to quickly bask in the glow of the harmoniousness of my guests, and we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come right back with some more questions about Japan. And I'm back with Celi and Patrick. So I'm going to ask this in a direct way because it's what our listeners want to know. How about finding work in Japan? Because Celi, you talked about the JET program, and Patrick kind of went things a different way. Did you apply directly to the schools that you ended up working in? And can you tell us a little bit about that process?
Yes. So the school I taught at in Sendai, I was a direct hire to the school. The application process was all done directly to the school. And because it was the same school that my sister was working at, it was a really smooth transition. I knew a few of the higher ups in the school, and so it was really simple, really smooth. And so actually a lot of people ask me, since they see my content, they assume I'm a JET teacher or an ALT of some sort. But I always have to tell them, like, I've never actually been a part of any of those kinds of programs. I was a direct hire, which does make your experience as an English teacher a bit different. But yeah, it was great. The jobs I had after the school in Sendai, those ones were actually found those jobs through Gaijin Pot, which is a resource that I've mentioned to so many people so many times. But it's a great, just list of tons of jobs that are available for foreigners in Japan, and I was able to, I found my last school through Gaijin Pot and applied through there. My current school it's an international school. I was a direct hire to the school also, but it's a totally different, category, being an international school versus, a job where you're teaching English. So yeah, I was not an ALT, was not a part of a dispatch company of any sort when I first moved here.
Mhm. As for Celi, you have been through the JET program, and we talked about that a little bit earlier. And how would you say that's contrasted against your previous teaching experiences in other countries? What's that transition been like, and how have you found it?
Right. So in South Korea, my first time ever teaching abroad, kind of applied directly. I used a recruiter
Mhm.
and they paired us up with the school, did the interview, everything with one school. It was a pretty seamless, straightforward process. Thailand, I actually used, I think it was Daisy SL Cafe for finding
Yeah.
jobs and some interviews.
Shout out
Also,
Dave.
yeah, I recommend. So in that one, I didn't have a recruiter or anything. It was just me setting up the interviews with some emails. I actually did that at the airport on my way to Chiang Mai. So possible as well. In Japan, though, I went the most official route you could have taken. As in terms of ALT jobs, the JET program's a government program, so it makes the process pretty straightforward with application process, but also a lot of documents. But getting set up, they have this phrase and it's like every situation is different, and it, oh my gosh, it really is. But it's kind of, yeah, everyone falls on that, but yeah, it really is. It just really depends on whether you're a high school ALT or who your supervisor is or who your board of education is. It's completely different. So with the JET program, you fill out the application, you arrive, you have Tokyo orientation, then you are kind of like sent off like little ants to all the different prefectures. Then you meet your contracting organization, which can be your school or it can be the Board of Education for the city.
Mhm.
And whether they help you take you to the bank. I know for me, my supervisor went with me, but then didn't go with me to set up my debit card. And I had to do that by myself. But then
Wow.
it completely zeroed, like very little Japanese that I had at that point. And then there's
Mhm.
some people who are taken to the bank for every single appointment. Someone goes with them, and there are some people that don't receive any help at all. So that's one thing with the JET program, is that it really just depends, which is why, yeah, I just recommend knowing ahead of time and just being ready for really good or very challenging.
That was a very diplomatic way of putting it. That's yeah. Every experience is different. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, it is a successful route for a lot of teachers, and people do find all sorts of different jobs, which is kind of the next thing I want to ask. You kind of touched on there, Patrick, that you've been in sort of two different kind of frontiers of teaching. Sally, you've had different teaching experiences. In terms of Japan, there are different kinds of schools, there are different kinds of jobs. What kind of things have you encountered, and have you spoken to people from other kinds of schools and whatever kind of different types of teaching jobs, and what kind of have you heard from within the sort of Japanese teaching scene, if you like? I'll go to Patrick. You've been there a bit longer, so I'll refer to you on this one, and then we'll come to you afterwards, Sally.
Yeah, that's a good question. Most of the teachers that I've met, English teachers in Japan, um, I think they mostly seem to enjoy their jobs. There are a
Mm,
number of them, though, who express some sort of dissatisfaction, frustration, or just like when I ask them how their year has been, if they've been like a year in Japan or if they've been here for 2 years, how's your 2 years been? They often will say like, it's all right. I'm still kind of adjusting to things. Even 2 years down the line, sometimes it takes a while for people to adjust, which is a whole different conversation, just adjustment to a new country, not just related to like your job, but just like life. But in terms of their job, they do mention that things, they don't go into details, but they often will say like, my school is, they did this thing last week, and or this person at my job is really on my case about this or that. But then there are a lot of people who say it's the best job in the world. Like it's easy. I have great students. I love the area I live in, a whole range of things. And so I mean, I hate to have to fall back on that phrase again, but it's really true. Like what Celi was saying, like every situation is different. It really just depends on location, depends on the company you're with, the school you're with. It depends on, if you have a community around you. That's something that I really think is important for anybody moving to a new country.
Makes us cringe. It makes us cringe to say it, so I won't say it again. But it's because we hear it so often, because it just really, I do think it all comes down to the expectations that you have beforehand.
Yeah.
I think that will really, really play a role in Japan experience as a whole. Japan is not an easy country to adjust to, and I think that's what I can just wish that people would understand, is that it all comes down to what you want to make of the experience, because it's a difficult country with a difficult culture to adjust to, like Patrick said, with meeting people. And as an ALT, for example, we are in that job in high school by myself, right? So I am the only foreigner in my school. And that can be tough for some people. It certainly was for me. I'm a super outgoing person. I'm super social. And there are some days at my school that I say 0 words, because that is just, the teachers are busy, or maybe, they're not as comfortable speaking English, just a wild range of things, right? But just understanding that it really comes down to what you want to make out of the experience, and really thinking of, why are you in Japan? Because there are going to be, like Patrick said, so many people that complain, and there are things to me that have been difficult to accept about Japanese work culture, for example, right? And that's something I had a really tough time with. And I think you just have to hit that line where, and it sounds kind of bad, right? But it's something that you can't change in the position that you are. Usually, even Japanese workers don't have a lot of the resources to make that change, especially in government schools. They're not allowed to, like, protest or do any type of sort of action like that. And just, you have to hit that line where, what are you going to do with those feelings? Are you going to try to be that positive light and just kind of like gambare everyone, and keep the positivity, or are you going to kind of like let that bring you down and focus? It's just about what you focus on, just kind of accepting, and that you are just, why are you here? Are you here to stay? Are you here for a few years? And just make the best out of it that you can, because like you said, Japan is huge, and there's so much to see, and yeah, so many people to get to know.
There's just something I want to quickly kind of jump on there. You made a point about state education and about kind of the working culture. I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna attribute too much the needle away there, because I don't want to make life difficult for you. But there was something I wanted to ask anyway. Patrick, you've worked at state and international school level. Celi, you're working within the state school infrastructure, if I'm right. I'd be interested to know what kind of school that your husband's working in, but you've both got experience, not just in Japan necessarily, but the differences between types of schools. Schools that are run as businesses, schools that are government run, international schools, that kind of thing. Within Japan, I'm just wondering what the sort of distinct cultural differences are, and how the students differ between, your international schools and your state schools, and what the kind of, as I say, the kind of cultural sort of broad stroke differences are there major kind of distinct differences between these kind of institutions? And just as a kind of guide for our listeners, what are they kind of more commonly referred to as? Because you get in South Korea, for example, there are hagwons, these kind of cram schools. What are the different schools in Japan, and how are they different? I'll let either of you jump in on that one.
I can speak a little bit to it. So the kinds of schools that I taught at, my first 2 jobs, actually, yeah, the first 2 jobs were primarily kindergartens. So those are called yochien, and they kind of also, I wouldn't say doubled as, but they also offered like hoikuen services, so like a kind of like a more daycare sort of service for families. And so those experiences, I was not a kindergarten teacher at my first school, because it's a lot, but the school was primarily a kindergarten. I taught in the after school program. So I would take students who came from the kindergarten, who would graduate from the kindergarten, and teach them after the school day ended. So they'd graduate from the kindergarten, they'd go off to their different elementary schools, and they come to my after school classes for English instruction. And so I would say those kinds of students functioned a lot differently than I think students who you might teach in a elementary school or in a middle school or high school function. The students who came to my after school program, those ones were ones that either chose to continue learning English, or they, sometimes their parents just wanted them to continue learning English. It was kind of like a, what's it called? Like a JUCO, which is like a cram school, but we tried to make it very enjoyable, fun environment for the kids, so they would, continue coming. But often, yeah, the kids wanted to be there, so it made their experience a lot different, I think. And their approaches to learning were a lot different than what I've heard from a lot of people who've taught in elementary, middle school, and high schools. And at that school, I taught from like 4-year-olds all the way up to high schoolers. I taught the whole range, and they do get a lot quieter as they get older, like Celi was saying earlier. But it was nice to know that they were still choosing to come. So even though they were quiet and so reserved, would, put in the time for English practice. Like they would actually, contribute to class and answer questions and whatnot. Sometimes you had to pull teeth, but it was good. It was still fine. And then, sorry, I'm taking up so much time, but contrasting
No,
that to
it's fine.
my current school, my international school, it's more like a typical school setting. And so, they're there because they have to go to school, the students. However, now that I'm teaching first grade only, I've taught and talked a lot about my years or my experiences teaching young kids, and how just, they're so excited about life, and they have lots of questions, and they are lots of fun, and they're crazy and all this stuff. And that's very much still the case with my current class. So even though it's like, it's a school, and so you don't have that factor of like, okay, they're choosing to be here, they want to continue learning this, that, or the other. Like it's not like we have to make it a fun environment for the kids sort of thing. You still have that energy, I think, that comes from the kids. They still have that sense of like, oh, this is a fun place. And I do still try to make sure that my class is a fun environment for the kids. So yeah, that's what my experience has been, teaching kids in those different types of school structures. But yeah, it's been good. All kinds of experiences.
And Sally, talk to me about the experience of your school and the type of school it is.
So I did want to mention that high school in Japan is not mandatory, and I think that plays a really big role in what the environment of your school is going to be. So in my school, my base school, because I go to different visit schools throughout the
Okay.
week, but my base school is a college prep high school. So it's an academic high school is what we call them within the city. So what this means is that the students are coming to school, they pay for school, which I think is really important to mention. It's not free. So they're coming to school specifically to get prep to go to certain universities around Japan. Whether that's in Iwaki, whether that's in Tokyo or in Sendai, they're coming here because they already know that they are going straight to university to study for their future jobs. And English is a really big part of university exams in Japan, which in that case you would think, whoa, then, English education should be like top, and really, really important. But the way that we teach it in high school, and me as an ALT, I am there to really just offer like conversation practice and teach them about culture, holidays, but also just conversation opportunities. But their normal English classes are all memorization. It is all straight from the university textbooks and the university exams. So it is from their textbooks and exams, and they're just required to just memorize exactly what they need for the exams. There is not really an understanding of any grammars or any conversation patterns, and that's just, I'm speaking about Iwaki. I'm sure maybe Tokyo education in high school might be different because you can see it in the levels of English, but in a countryside school, it is specifically taught what is needed for the exam. As far as students' personalities, though, and their, the atmosphere in the classroom, they are certainly super shy. I go to some visit schools that are not academic schools. They're actually just very, very rural schools, and the students are super genki. They're super energetic. But my base school, because it's academic, I think the students have this like extra pressure to just be perfect and not make mistakes because they know they're in competition with everybody else in that classroom. And I think that puts a certain pressure that allows you to not, be your normal self and raise a hand. However, what I think is really funny though is that whenever I tell my classes and I remind them, like, hey guys, I'm a teacher from the States. I am not a Japanese teacher in American classrooms, in Canadian classrooms, in Australian classrooms. Students always speak, students always raise their hand, and you can see them like, okay. So then at that class, when it's time to share at the end, and I'm like, please raise your hand, I at least get, out of a class of 40, I at least get like 5 to 7 students, which is a lot for them to raise their hand. So, I think it's just they are so entranced and they're so focused on keeping, what they believe that the classroom atmosphere should be, that sometimes they just need a little reminder that in other places it's not like this, and that it is okay to just like raise your hand and speak. And yeah, and it just sometimes takes just a reminder to get them to kind of like open up a bit.
We're going to take another quick break, and I'll be right back with Celi and Patrick. I'm back with Celi and Patrick. Now, Japan, obviously, massive, massive destination, not just for tourists, but obviously for people who want to teach and live there. Now, I've written. You might have missed it. I don't know. It was everywhere. It was a very popular blog post, and by very popular, I mean sort of relatively popular by my own personal work standards. But it was about etiquette in Japan. It's about 5 things that new teachers should know about. But I want to ask people who are actually living and working there, is there anything that, broadly speaking, newcomers to Japan might not have accounted for? And I mean that in terms of culture, in terms of etiquette. Are there any things that you've picked up along the way that you didn't realize beforehand that are actually essential to living in Japan? I'm going to go to Celi on this because she's a bit newer to Japan, and then Patrick, you can help us out.
Before I was coming to Japan, I do remember I was watching reels on Instagram, and there were so many videos about things not to do in Japan. I don't know if it's been the same for you, Patrick, right? It's so saturated. It's like, do not do this when you come to Japan, or the Japanese people will look at you, all of this really pressure heavy things. And turns out, that was one of the fun things we got to ask our students at the beginning, like, is this true? What do you think of this? And in Iwaki, drinking and eating at the same time or while walking is actually allowed. And this is something the students are actually really proud about. They're like, but in Iwaki, you are allowed to walk and drink, and you are allowed to walk and eat. I don't know the reason why Iwaki is just like outside of this bubble, because I know a lot of people talk about it in Tokyo, which blows my mind because in Tokyo there's so many tourists and there's so many things to eat from stalls, which I find it crazy that in Tokyo it being so crowded, you can just stand on the side of the street. But yeah, that's just one of those things that there's so many things you just find out the moment you arrive that are just things that people maybe visited as a tourist and saw once, or maybe one Japanese person told them one thing about this one very specific manner that they were doing, and they thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to make a video about this one thing, and now everybody thinks that's the thing. And I think Japanese society as a whole is becoming a lot more lax about a lot of things. Not to say don't follow etiquette, like there's so many etiquettes to follow in while drinking and eating and things like that. I think that's very important. But something like walking and drinking, I think that's becoming a little bit more lax. Maybe it's because my city's at the beach. It's on the coast, and we're a beach city. That could be it. But yeah, that's one thing that really made me realize, like, Japan is so big. Not, what you see once doesn't necessarily apply to all of it.
And Patrick, you've been in Japan for a decade, so can you follow up on that? Is there any...
So, first of all, I should say, I think I'm one of the contributors to that trend of, scaring people away from doing this or that in Japan, because I've definitely made at least a video, maybe more, not a lot, maybe just like 2 or 3, but definitely one video saying like, oh, you shouldn't do this in Japan. And I'm pretty sure it was an eating and walking video. It may have been a series that I was doing a while ago that was like POV, you're a foreigner in Japan, where I would just show foreigners, like the POV of a foreigner doing different things, like going to a music concert, going to the beach, falling down on the street and like having different Japanese people react to that foreigner. And I want to say there was one where I did that trend, or that one for that series that was about eating and walking, but I don't remember if it was that series or not. But I definitely have made one because I remember making the caption like, by the way, don't eat and walk in Japan. Like I remember clearly writing that. And now I don't feel like that's the case anymore. I've definitely changed my tune. I feel like people, even in Tokyo, are more open to that. Like you see Japanese people eating and walking, not a ton, but you see it happening. And so I really think it doesn't matter. And people will always, there are people who will play the foreign card, which is where they'll just say, I'm foreign, I can do whatever I want. They know Japanese people aren't going to say anything to them or really judge them, which they definitely will judge you. They just won't say it out loud. But there are people who play that card, and then there are people who do it just not knowing any better. And if you do it, innocently, like it's not going to affect you negatively. But I would say, I think something that I've come to recommend to people when they move here in terms of etiquette is just observe. Just look around, see what people are doing, because you can see clearly what is okay and what's not okay. You can, like Japanese people are really big on reading the room, whether it's in conversation or with their actions, like whether you're at a dinner table with friends, like whether you're, going to someone's house, visiting a friend, like you really have to read the room, see what other people are doing, read their expressions, and that will clue you in on how to move throughout that conversation or that event or that experience. But the longer you're here, obviously you pick up more and more and more, and it becomes just like a very easy thing to do. But when you're first moving here, just observe a lot, see what people are doing. Even when it comes to buying, I don't know, stuff at the grocery store, just like watch, because it's really not hard to pick up on what is proper etiquette and what's not. But again, Japanese people will be forgiving because they know you're foreign and they know you don't know their customs, or they assume you don't know their customs. Which again is not always the case for some foreigners. Some do and just abuse that privilege. But Japanese people are so don't worry about it too much, but definitely do put some effort into learning the etiquette here, learning what's okay and not okay.
I would say learning etiquette too can benefit you so much with like your coworkers. I think that's something that's really important. Like something like walking, what I was saying, like walking and eating or walking and drinking, like that's not really affecting your relationships to people, which is why I'm like, I could be more lax in some places, but etiquettes that really matter, like when you're at a company party, which ALTs go to, and I'm sure Patrick goes to a ton being, an international school teacher. So things like that, something as simple as like making sure everybody's drink is being poured, and you'll see people doing that. Like I went to my first one and all I had to do was observe, and I was just noticing how no one was drinking their drink before they made sure that everybody's drink was okay. And even after, everybody's already having their drinks, their teas, whatever, it's just this communal awareness of making sure everybody is okay, and you as a foreigner being able to observe that and just take part of it. Even just pouring one tea or one drink goes such a long way, and that's where you really make those impressions like, wow, they care. And just small things like that, from omiyage to business cards, just there's so many things, but just by observing you can pick up, like Patrick said, you just pick it up and it makes a huge difference.
I love that, and there's so much just generally good advice there. I think anyone, whether you're listening to this podcast for enjoyment, maybe you don't have any plans to go to Japan at all, but you're listening to this out of enjoyment. That's really good advice for life. I think you should go and observe people, and you should consider your relationships with people around you, and you should go anywhere you go, try and make it a bit better than when you arrive, and try and make life better for the people around you. I think first thing that comes to mind. What's an unexpected perk to Japanese living that our listeners need to know about?
Perks. There's a lot of perks. I mean, the cleanliness is kind of unmatched. It's such a clean country. The customer service is really, really great. The toilet seats, I can't recommend those enough.
Do they talk and sing and stuff like that?
Some do. Yeah, sometimes you'll have the toilet seats in like malls and stuff where they'll have a button where you can push to play music or like birds chirping or something. I
Yeah,
don't.
Okay.
it's all about privacy.
Yeah, all about
Mhm.
privacy. Japan's big on privacy.
That's good.
But they're also heated often, which is great in the wintertime because no one
Heated
likes,
seats.
yes, no
Hmm.
one wants to go to the toilet in the middle of the night in wintertime and sit on a cold toilet seat, right? So that's wonderful. And then
Hmm.
the bidet feature is just really convenient. You
Totally.
I
can't go
didn't.
back after you've experienced it, I
I
feel.
did ask for an unexpected perk, and I got an unexpected perk, so I can't
Delivered.
complain. I really can't complain. You know,
Yeah.
10 out of 10. Can you top that?
I don't think I can top bidets, honestly. I can't. And heated toilets, heated seats.
Well,
Look, you got me there. Totally can't. Yeah.
Hmm.
I don't know. No, I would
well.
say, I mean, yeah, no, you can't beat the bidets, but I would say, I mean, obviously the transportation's great, but I think I would say look into flights because Japan is so big. A lot of people think Shinkansen, but the Shinkansen is really, really expensive,
Mm.
especially if you live in Japan or want to go during your trip like all around. Flights are usually cheaper, way
Hmm.
cheaper. Yeah, you lose like a couple of hours, right? Just being a little bit early at the airport, but that's one thing I learned really, really fast that a flight round trip to Osaka is cheaper than my Shinkansen down to Osaka.
Mm.
So just that was really, really unexpected
Mm.
for me that the
Cool.
Shinkansen was so expensive.
Okay. Well, no,
And
this is
bidets.
good to know. Okay, but I, this episode's going to end up being named after bidets, and it's going to be a whole thing. And
Worth it.
yeah, I mean, we'll get amazing listening figures, but hopefully people are pleasantly surprised, as I suppose they would be by a bidet. Anyway, so moving on as swiftly as I can. So there's an interesting debate that's come up, and Patrick, this is something that you've covered online, and it's a debate about the sort of the behaviour of teachers, especially kind of newer teachers, if I'm right in saying that. And it's if I'm right in saying this, the impression I get is that it's a debate that's sort of become a wider discussion within Japan. And it's about the behaviour of teachers, and specifically the behaviour of some English teachers. Patrick, can you sort of describe the situation from your point of view? And Celi, I'd be really keen to get your take as well as a newer teacher, just from the perspective of what should good English teachers come over to Japan? How should they conduct themselves, and what are the things to watch out for?
So there's been a very common sort of, I guess, stereotype that's been attributed to English teachers in Japan. For years, it's been that English teachers come to Japan, or foreigners choose to come to Japan with an English teaching job just to like have fun in Japan. They use it as a ticket to get to Japan, and they don't take their job seriously, and they just, party and stuff, and don't
Uh-huh.
respect the culture, don't attempt to learn the language, all this stuff. And so, being an English teacher for most of my time in Japan, I heard that from people. More so when I moved to Tokyo. I didn't really hear it too much in Sendai, but when I moved to Tokyo and met other foreigners in Japan, and started to get into social media with my TikToks and everything, I became more aware of that stereotype. And so what was interesting was that, well, one thing, it never really affected me. I never really took that to heart. I never let that deter me from continuing to teach English. I enjoyed my job. I enjoyed the kids I taught, and that was the most important thing to me, my students. So I didn't really care about that. I did eventually make the transition to working as a homeroom teacher in an international school after acquiring my teaching license because that's just something I wanted to do, but it wasn't at all because of the stereotype, the negative stereotype that was going around. However, I did make a video probably maybe like 5 months ago, 4 months ago. That was like a comedy based skit with a friend about trying to make friends in Japan, with quotation marks, make friends in Japan. But in the end, it turns out that the person's actually trying to just get a Japanese wife. It's a whole thing. But at one part of the skit, the girl, who's my friend, she runs away from me after I tell her I'm a teacher. And then when I say, oh, I'm not an English teacher, though, she runs back, indicating that she was assuming I was an English teacher, and that was a big turnoff. And that generated a whole lot of conversation in the comment section of that video, where people were like,
It did.
Tons of questions and explanations and all this stuff. So like people were really confused about why that was something she would run away from hearing. And so I ended up having to make a follow-up video a couple days later explaining like, well, so this is what that's about basically. And I basically said what I already explained. There's a stereotype that goes around about teachers and everything, and that, I enjoyed my time as an English teacher, but some people, they really don't value. I mean, I enjoyed my time as an English teacher because of the job itself. I enjoyed pouring myself into my work and trying to grow the students in their English and establishing relationships with the kids. That's what I enjoyed, and that's why I did it for so long, even though it's not something that a lot of people, foreigners in Japan, like see as like a good job, with quotation marks, a good job. So I just did that quick explanation. But even now, I still get comments on that video with people being like, "Oh man, this is so surprising. I was looking into moving to Japan as an English teacher, not anymore." And I'm like, man, I feel like I did some damage with that. And so I try to reply when I can and be like, "Oh no, you definitely should still, if that's what you want to do, if you want to teach English, like do it. It's going to be an unforgettable experience. You're going to maybe have some lows, but you're going to have some amazing highs too. Like it's going to probably change your life," because it tells me it's reconnecting, but that's fine. Because that's how I felt too. I felt like it was a life-changing experience, and I regret none of it. I even made a whole YouTube video that kind of breaks down even more my decision to transition from English teaching into working at an international school as a homeroom teacher, because I just wanted to share that with people. Like, this was a big change for me, and this is why. But
Mm-hmm.
I took a lot of time in that video to explain, like, English teaching was some of the best years of my life. And I made so many relationships with the students I taught during that time that I would not ever take any of it back, even though people have a lot to say about English teachers. Like it was great. So that's sort of what that whole stereotype thing is.
I think it's something that's important to address, because I think throughout this discussion, but with the two of you, it's been very clear that, being an English teacher abroad anywhere should be about exploring a place, but also being enormously respectful of it, having the credentials to teach, having the correct attitude and enthusiasm to teach, making a place better than where you left it. So, Celi, I wanted to get your take on what Patrick said there, and kind of about the culture of English teaching in Japan, what your experiences have been since you arrived. And I kind of want to get your take on what Patrick's kind of spoken about there.
So I haven't really gotten bad attitudes, maybe because I'm in the countryside, so there's less of us. I think, as Patrick said, in Tokyo, right, maybe there's more people, and it's just that much more common. I also think locations attract specific types of people. Like the foreigners in Seoul, Korea are very different to the foreigners in Busan, South Korea. And I think that's the same with like foreigners in Tokyo versus foreigners like in the countryside. And I'm talking about the people that come to Japan thinking I only want to be in Tokyo, right? The people that are like, that is my place, I'm not going anywhere else. With a program as big as JET, I think you just get every type of person possible. You get people who have credentials, but at the end of the day, JET program, you can get anybody, which is why I'm going to sound like I'm trying to sell getting a TFL, but I really am. I think that's why it's so important that people get credentials and get something like a TFL certification, because that's where, these courses include so many things that you can tell with people that are sometimes in being ALTs in Japan that they just never learned, or they just never got. And that's where a lot of issues can stem from, whether it's their behavior at work, or their relationship to their coworkers, or just how they present themselves. I think just having credentials or having some type of training just sets you up for success. So that's my opinion. It's just, there's every type of teacher out there, and there's every type of foreigner, and different places attract different people.
Sure. Yeah, I think it was important to bring that up because certainly it is something that we've been asked about in the kind of follow up to podcast episodes we've done and talking about Japan in general because the demand is so huge. But I certainly don't think people want to go there and be perceived a certain way, especially if other people are, I don't want to say ruining the experience, but if people are going there with the wrong intentions and they're not going there to try and adapt to a culture and they're not going with respectful intentions, then I think, as is the case anywhere, people are going to ask questions, and clearly, if people go there in bad faith, that's gonna cause reputational damage to any industry, So I think it's important to note that there are people like yourselves who are fantastic teachers. There's a wealth of great teaching talent over there who are going in good faith, and they're going and appreciating the culture, and they're appreciating the students, and they're making the English teaching infrastructure better. So
Yeah,
yeah, it's an
definitely.
important discussion, I think.
There are a lot of teachers here who are so hardworking. They're dedicated to their work, they're dedicated to their students, dedicated to their city. They're involved in their students' lives with their families. Like, there's so many people who actually do value teaching English here. You do have those who don't value it, but you have so many who do. And so I hope that that's something that people who are considering coming to Japan as an English teacher do also keep in mind. They're not going to be just, they're not going to move here and then just be lumped into this category of a bad English teacher and see themselves surrounded by people who don't value what they do. They're going to meet a lot of people who actually do value what they do and take it to heart. So yeah, I hope people can understand that.
Mm-hmm. Cool. I know this is an extremely American reference, but I kind of want to do the sort of "now you know" kind of sound. The
The more
sort of
you know.
Now you
do.
know.
The
The
more you
more
know,
you
that's
know.
it. See, I
So close.
really I screwed that reference up.
The more you
It's
know.
a yeah. I mean, it was well worth a go. I don't even know if that's an ABC thing or an NBC. I don't know, but it was worth a go. Hey, look, we're gonna take a break, and I'm gonna ask you some pretty rapid questions about being in Japan, teaching English in Japan. But we're gonna wrap it up, and it's sad because I don't want to, but we'll come right back after the break. And I'm back with Celi and Patrick. And I asked this not knowing what the future will hold for you both. I know it's going to be really exciting and fruitful for you both. But when you get an opportunity to look back on your careers and your times teaching in Japan, what do you think you're going to remember most fondly? And we'll go to Celi on that because you've not been here as long. But what strikes you most? And what are your kind of fondest memories so far of teaching in Japan?
I think my fondest memories will definitely be just exploring so many parts of Japan that I didn't even know existed. Like, I think it was 2 weeks ago, my friend texted me and she said, "Hey, there's these god sculptures in this random village, very remote village about an hour away." And it was nothing that was online. It was nothing that we had to pay tickets for. There were just these sculptures in front of some temples, and one of them was in front of this random parking lot. And we went out there not knowing what to expect. And I remember I was looking at one of them and just thinking, wow, like, when I leave Japan, I can't see this anywhere else. Like, this very random sculpture that people take such good care of it, painting it every season. Um, all of the plants that are on it, all of the tree branches are different. I'm like, that is something so special to this small village that, yeah, is nowhere else in the world, only here. And I think I'll remember a lot of those moments that I've had whenever it's time to go.
And Patrick, what do you think you'll look most fondly upon at a later date, I suppose?
I guess I would say that there's a few things kind of piggybacking off of what Sally just said with like just the amazing sights that you see in Japan. There's so much nature here, like just beautiful nature that you forget exists when you're, in the middle of your week of work. But then when you have a chance to travel a bit and see, like even going to some of the more touristy places, climbing up the mountain where the famous red torii gates are lined up, it's really, really well known. There's this bunch of red gates that go up this mountain. Climbing up to the top of it and looking out at the view of the city, That's in Kyoto, I believe. So beautiful. I remember that. I climbed that mountain, I think, twice. And both times were just like, wow, like I live in a country that has beautiful nature like this. It was really just a moment of like, wow, just profound awe I felt. I'm going to miss those kinds of experiences. I'm also gonna really miss, well, bidets, those toilet seats. You can't beat those toilet seats. I guess you can buy them though overseas. So I'm gonna really miss, or not miss, but I'm gonna really value, um, and really keep close to my heart all of the relationships that I've built with the people here. I've talked before about my students and how much I really, really value time with them and building those bonds with them. Even just, was it yesterday? There's a student who reached out to me, a student I used to teach years ago. She reached out to me on Instagram and she was like, "Oh, I think you taught me." I'm happy to be able to have had such an impact on these kids that years later they're able to sort of relive some of their experience through social media, talking with me and finding out that I do in fact remember them and still care for them, because I do. My students are, I always tell this to them. I tell them every year and I end up crying every time. But I'm like, I love you guys. That's why I'm here in this country. Like,
Yeah, great answers from both of you there. That was fantastic. And so, just to round things off very nicely, you're both very very active on social media. You've both got immense followings. So I want to ask, where can people find you and keep up with your adventures? And what's next for both of you? Celi, we'll go to you first.
So I am definitely not have the following that Patrick does, but I do post a little bit about the Japanese countryside every once in a while. My Instagram is Celi with a C. Celi.reader, and that's two E's. Yeah, what's next for me? Yeah, I think next year, about end of July or August, I think I will be heading out to my next country, hopefully, to try and settle down. Yeah, it's very concepts of a plan, but I am thinking of going for Australia and transferring over my teaching license from the States and trying that out. I really, really miss teaching young kiddos. That's definitely my sweet spot. And yeah, just listening to Patrick and all his stories is just amazing. Yeah, I just miss it very much and definitely want to take that next step. And I have some friends in Australia. Hopefully, start building and settling into that community and hopefully be there for the next few years if it all works out. So yeah, just trying to teach kinder again, basically. That's what's for me, hopefully, in my line. Yeah.
Amazing, Patrick. Where can people find you and what have you got coming up?
well, first of all, I want to say, like, thank you for sharing your experiences, Sally. Like, this was really nice to hear, and that's cool that you want to go back to teaching. You said kinder? Okay.
Yeah,
Primary
just primary.
Young kids are where it's at.
Yeah.
It's so much fun teaching them. Older kids are really fun too, but yeah, little kids are so much fun to teach.
Yeah.
You can find me on social media at the Paper Pat, the paper, and then just Patrick without the Rick, the Paper Pat. And what's next for me? I will continue teaching at my school. I'm in my it's been a year and a half, I think, almost my second year at my current school. So I'll keep teaching, probably first grade, and yeah, living life in Japan. I want to travel a bit more. I haven't been able to travel in a few years since COVID, really. I haven't taken any big trips anywhere besides going back to visit my family every Christmas. So I would like to travel more in Japan and see more of what's around here. But yeah, I'll be here in Japan.
Nice one. Well, Patrick, when you are traveling around Japan, tag us in some of your photos on Instagram. Let us know all about it. And Celi, well, you can, if you follow the TEFL Org on Instagram, you can see what Celi and her husband Wiley are up to. They've both contributed some fantastic videos to our social feeds, and they've gone down really well. People love them. So yeah, I can't thank you both enough for joining me again on the podcast. It's been so great speaking to you both. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so
It was
much.
great.
Thank you for having us.